Today I thought it would be fun to start off this video with the gift that keeps on giving. And by the way, Merry Christmas for everybody tuning in to my video this holiday weekend. Really appreciate you being here. And you might be asking yourself, well, what is the gift that keeps on giving, Michael? What is that? Especially when it comes to real estate. Interestingly enough, the gift that keeps on giving this year is home builders. That's right, home builders are the gift that keep on giving, because these guys are giving you anything right now to close the deal. How do I know that? Well, there was a new report out today talking about how the sales of brand new single family homes in the US have risen for the second straight month in a row. And that's a very interesting thing to take a look at while the rest of the housing market is in a nosedive right now. Where are these homes being sold and for how much? Like, what's going on here? Well, first of all, in the Midwest, and surprisingly enough, out in the western half of the US is where most of these brand new homes are being sold right now. And this is how you can tell just how desperate these guys are. It was reported that with these home sales ticking up right now, 62% of these new home builders are giving people incentives right now to close these deals. 62%, guys. So that means way over half the people who bought a brand new home got some sort of icing on the cake to go ahead and close the deal. And when you combine all of these freebies and incentives that are on the table for our people to buy these new homes, and when we had that dip in interest rates for a couple weeks, that was basically the perfect time for people to just go ahead, jump in, and buy a brand new home. People who have been waiting on the sidelines, they basically took advantage of this situation, and good for them. Although I hope that people who got themselves into this got a good interest rate, and if they went for one of the buy down deals, which is very common with these new construction homes, well, they'll buy down your interest rate for the first 2 or 3 years. I hope that everyone who did this actually can afford what the final payment's going to be, because that's where most people get in trouble with this. They think, well, you know, the initial payment for the first couple of years is going to be great, and then one thing that these builders will tell them is, don't worry, you'll be able to refinance in a couple of years by the time, you know, the full payment matures. But that might not be true, because as we know, prices are falling everywhere right now, and new construction homes are not immune to this by any means. And so if your only game plan is to go ahead and refinance in a couple of years to get out of a payment you can't afford, you could be in for a big surprise with that. But in the long run, this is going to mean that we're going to have less new homes built eventually, because what's happening is the permits being pulled by new construction home builders are at a 2.5-year low right now. So one thing we have is a lot of new construction homes that are still in the pipeline and haven't been built. There's a lot of them are in the process of being built right now, but they're not ready to move in yet. And so because the home builder sentiment is so low right now, these guys are not pulling new permits, which is going to affect how many new units are going to come available to the market in the future. But as of right now, moving into 2023, they have a lot of inventory to unload, guys. And just to give you an idea how many we're talking about here, at the end of November 2022, there was about 471,000 new construction homes being marketed for sale in different various stages of development. And only 13% of them are actually finished and move-in ready. So that's not very many. So that gives you a big hint at how many are going to be coming into 2023. And so this is basically the worst timing ever for these builders to be releasing this inventory. And that's why we've been talking about, if you've been wanting to have a brand new house and you've been waiting on the sidelines, you could be getting some very sweet deals into 2023, because all these builders are already constructing these homes. They're going to get finished at some point. And so because of that, you could have the opportunity of a lifetime to go ahead and buy a brand new home at a steep discount or whatever other incentives they're willing to give you, probably by the middle of next year when the entire housing market is in trouble. But just so you guys know that I'm not biased about this, the price that these new homes are selling at are about $471,000 for most of these new construction homes, and that's still up 9.5% year over year from last year. So they're still more expensive than they were a year ago, but imagine where things are going to be in a year from now with these new build homes and what kind of deals you'll be able to get at the end of 2023. Now, I have a very interesting real estate crypto story to share with you guys today, and that's part of the reason I'm walking over here in Surfside on the beach right now, because this story is based right in my own neighborhood here, guys. I'm right down the street from here, and right over here behind me, this big building is that new one there in the middle with the black and the glass with like the pyramid shape. This place is called Arte or Archie. I don't know exactly how you pronounce it. It's A-R-T-E is the name of the building. And that's where Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner live. But here's the interesting thing about this place. There was a penthouse unit in this building that was purchased with cryptocurrency in June of 2021 for $22.5 million, guys. $22.5 million was the purchase price, okay? Before we get into the whole story, just look over there for me and let me know in the comments, do you think a unit here is worth $22.5 million? Now, they didn't say in the article which cryptocurrency was used to purchase this unit, okay? But let's assume it was Bitcoin, considering that's the most valuable coin out there. It's the most trusted, it's the oldest, whatever. Let's say it was Bitcoin, okay? And why does that matter? Well, I'll tell you in just a minute. Because the person who bought the unit for $22.5 million, they paid in crypto, okay? And now they just sold the unit for $18 million. So they lost over $4 million, about $4.5 million they lost in the span of a year and a half trying to flip this property. So if you think that's bad, losing $4.5 million, let's take a look at what happened to the previous owner that accepted the cryptocurrency for this transaction, okay? They received $22.5 million in Bitcoin, and if we go back to June of 2021, Bitcoin was at about $35,000 per Bitcoin, give or take, okay? Fast forward to today, Bitcoin's down to about $17,000, so it's lost about half of its value since June of 2021, and of course it had an enormous run-up back at the end of 2021, where it reached about $64,000 in November last year. So if the previous owner accepted $22.5 million in Bitcoin and they held on to that Bitcoin, today they would have literally lost half of that money, guys. That's the insane thing about this. The previous owner that accepted $22.5 million, that could be cut down to about $11 million in today's dollars if they held the Bitcoin. And let's say, for example, they were smart and they had the Bitcoin and they sold it at the peak in November. Well, that actually would have netted them far more money. Not only would they have got the $22.5 million for the sale, they would have gotten a little over an extra $10 million in appreciation on that Bitcoin if they unloaded it all at the peak of the market back in November. And it's interesting because this story focuses mainly on the previous person that lost $4 million, you know, buying it for 22.5 and selling it for 18. But what about the owner before that accepted the 22.5 in Bitcoin, okay? And now, if they still have that Bitcoin, that's about $11 million. So imagine being in that position right now. This story is just like the perfect example of how volatile cryptocurrency can be and how much you can lose when you're trying to flip, especially on the high end like this. This person that bought with the crypto thought they were getting an amazing deal. You know, I bought this place for 22.5, and then they tried to sell it for 28 million, okay? That was their flip price that they tried to get for this property. But they got nowhere near that. They ended up selling for 18 million, guys. So 10 million less than they listed it for, thinking that they're just gonna flip this thing and someone's gonna come along and buy it. So remember this story when you think you're gonna get rich quick overnight when it comes to crypto or real estate or anything, guys. There is no shortcut to wealth in life, okay? People who went through this deal are figuring that out the real hard way right now. And you can say, oh, Michael, losing $4 million when you're that rich is nothing. It's just a tax write-off for them. But it's not nothing, guys, for most people. Imagine, $4 million is life-changing. Someone deposited $4 million in my bank account right now. I would consider myself rich, okay? Obviously, that's not rich compared to the people that can afford to live here. but that's life-changing money, guys. You could never work again if you didn't want to off of $4 million. Pretty much anyone could, and live a nice, modest lifestyle with a lot of fun things to do, you know, endless amount of activities and fun until the day you die, okay? So don't tell me $4 million is not a lot of money. It's a huge amount of money for someone to lose, but losing 10 million potentially by accepting cryptocurrency for the payment on this place is far more devastating, which to me is just unbelievable, guys. And you know, the interesting thing about this is I think there is a place in the future for real estate to be transacted in Bitcoin, but the main issue with it, as you can see, is because the volatility of the price is just so up and down, you cannot predict where it's going to go in the near future. And you know, making these big transactions like this in a very volatile currency, what you don't know what's going to be worth in a week from now, is extremely risky and dangerous. And you know, we're far away from being able to really make that a reality. Maybe it will never become a reality, because the real opportunity with buying and selling real estate doesn't really lie with Bitcoin itself, but more with the blockchain technology that it's built on to really help with the transfer of ownership in a much more efficient way, and you know, make sure there's no discrepancies with title and things like that. But never forget, guys, there's no free lunch. Now, I've read another great article today talking about all the things you need to be asking yourself if you're going to be a renter going into 2023. Things you should be considering when you are about ready to lease your next place. And this one's very timely because a lot of people are going to be looking at renting, since many people cannot afford to buy right now, or they're just waiting to buy because you know it's not a good time. This really applies right now when we have this huge blizzard, you know, this huge cold front basically engulfing most of the United States right now. And a lot of people might not think about this or realize what kind of maintenance obligations you might have in your lease during a weather event like this. So it's important to understand what you're liable for, what you're responsible for fixing and maintaining, and what the landlord is responsible for when you have these big weather events. Because if you don't know this, and if you're not looking at your lease carefully, you could end up being on the hook for damage potentially that's done to the property that you weren't aware of, that you were supposed to be maintaining. Like, say for example, live in an area where you're getting hit with this massive cold and you have pipes freezing or bursting, things like that. Are you responsible for winterization of the house, or is the landlord? Okay, that's a big one. What if you get 2 feet of snow and it all piles up on the roof of the house and caves in? Were you supposed to be responsible for snow removal? As you as the tenant, should you have been the one removing the snow from the roof of the house? Maybe, guys. You have to look at this stuff in your lease, because now obviously here in Florida, we don't have provisions about, you know, snow removal or things like that, but we have lawn maintenance in there. We have, you know, who's handling air conditioning maintenance in case that breaks down. We have things like pest control maintenance, you know, who's responsible for paying for that stuff. So you have to know what you're responsible for when you're getting yourself into a lease right now, more than ever, to avoid being blamed or charged for things that you shouldn't be paying for. And besides what you're going to be responsible for repairs and maintenance, what about reporting things that need to be reported to the landlord in order for them to take care of it? Say you know that the landlord needs to remove the snow on the roof because you got 2 feet of snow. Well, what's the procedure? Do you contact them? Do you contact the property manager? You need to know this stuff when you're going into a lease, because you can end up still putting yourself on the hook for not notifying the landlord in a timely manner that something like this is urgent and needs to be done sooner than later in order to protect the integrity of the property. You should also be looking at things like, what are the move-in costs and fees for this place? Because, for example, here in Florida, if you want to move into any of these condos here behind me, guys, it can be very costly. And to give you an example of how this works, when you rent one of these places, pretty much all the time now, the landlord's going to ask you for first month's rent, last month's rent, and security deposit. 3 months rent to move in. That's pretty much standard for any rental around here today. But beyond that, these buildings have their own set of fees that you'll likely have to pay when you want to move in. They have things like the elevator fee. You usually have to pay $100, $200 just to reserve the elevator and to use it, and that's usually non-refundable. They'll have an application fee, usually $100 per adult or $100 for a married couple. Then a lot of times the building might have their own security deposit that you have to pay. This is very common here, guys, and it can be as much as an additional 1 month's rent. So let's say your rent is $5,000 a month here, tack on an extra $5,000 to move in on top of that. Oh, that's not it though. You got pets? There's pet fees, okay? That can be charged either one time or on a monthly ongoing basis as well. So make sure you know when you're going to be looking at a rental and moving in, all of these fees up front, because if you don't know, you can easily get blindsided with a whole lot of extra expenses that you weren't planning on when moving in. In fact, I've had tenants when I used to do a lot of rentals in real estate that got so blindsided by this that they would actually cancel the deal because there was just too much. You know, there was too much extra expenses that they simply could not afford, and everyone loses. You know, I as a real estate agent lose the deal, no commission, they lose the rental, and the landlord lose the renter. So it's, you know, it's a lose-lose for everybody in a situation like that. You should also be looking at, you know, what kind of condition is this place in? Does it look like things are already broken? Does this place look like it's maintained? You know, what's going on? Is there mold? Is there cracks in the ceiling? You see stains in the ceiling where there might have been leaks in the roof. You see cracks in the foundation if it's a house. You know, how's the yard being maintained? You need to look at all of these things when you're jumping into a rental, because even though usually it's just for a year, guys, you know, that year can be a living hell for you if you're not really paying attention to these things. You're just desperate to get into a property without really looking into what you're getting yourself into right now. And you should always document the condition of the place before moving in. That way, the landlord can't come back to you and say, oh, that crack in the ceiling wasn't there when you moved in, or that crack in the wall wasn't there, that hole in the wall wasn't there. Well, yes, it was. I have the proof right here. And the same is true if you're a landlord. You should also do your own documentation, because the tenant can just as easily say, oh, that was already there and I don't have to pay for that. You know, you can't take my security deposit out for that. So you got to look out for these things and really protect yourself when you're going to be renting. That's the site of the former Champlain Towers, guys. We're walking by here again. It's been a while since I've been over this way. There it is. Now, when you're renting one of these condos like this, what about the amenities? You know, is everything there as promised? Are you getting the pool? Is the pool open? Is the gym open? Is the spa open? You know, all of these things, because a lot of times when you're renting in one of these fancy buildings, you know, like this here or something, they'll advertise a laundry list of amenities that you're supposed to get. But if you're not here to check it out for yourself to make sure that you're getting what you're supposed to be getting, you could get ripped off big time. Because if you rent a place sight unseen, for example, you might get there and actually half of these things are closed. Oh, the pool's under renovation. Well, the gym has a problem right now and it's closed. So, but you're paying full price, guys. That's the problem. You know, you're paying for the full amount of the rental, but you're not getting the full amount of amenities that you're supposed to be getting. And just some other simple things to look out for too, like how noisy is it going to be? You guys have heard me, you know, make jokes and complain a few times on my walks about the gardeners, you know, constantly making noise all day. Or say you're living in this fancy building right here and you're next to the old site of Champlain Towers. I don't know if you guys can hear that. I'll shut up for a second. But there's like a generator or something like that running next door, seems like constantly, and you're going to be hearing that. You need to really look at all of these things. And here's a big one that a lot of people don't think about that really gets overlooked a lot. Will you get along with your landlord or the property manager? Do they seem like a good person? Do they seem like they're easy to deal with? What about the neighbors? What about the people you're going to be living near? You know, what are they up to? Are they outside smoking weed 24/7 and blasting music? And you know, what's going on over there? You have to look at these things before you make a full-on decision of when you're going to move in somewhere, because if you're not paying attention, you could easily end up actually moving into a pretty bad situation that you know, you're not going to be happy with, and you're stuck there for a year minimum. I'm just trying to give you guys a heads up of all the things you could be facing when you're looking at getting a new lease. Now, the final thing is inflation. In case you guys are unaware, the government is well on their way to passing this 1.7 trillion with a T, spending bill that is basically not doing much to help the average American, guys. And we all know that inflation has been a real problem for most of 2022, and the Fed is continuing with their interest rate hikes. And what a lot of people don't realize is the more the government fights this, the more that they spend, the more they do these spending packages like this at a time when the Fed is trying to curb inflation. This is just going to make things worse, guys, because what this is going to do is it's going to force the Fed to continue with rate hikes further into the future than anticipated, as well as bring the federal funds rate to a higher amount than they anticipated as well. And when you combine these two things right now, it's basically a recipe for disaster, because you can already see how much the economy is starting to tank, and the federal funds rate is not even at the 5% mark that they want to see it at yet. And when they actually get to the 5% mark, it might not be enough, because the government doesn't know how to stop spending. They just look for different ways to keep spending money right now. And to give you an idea of the things that they're spending money on with this, they're giving $45 billion to Ukraine, by the way. Now, I'm not saying these people don't need help, but you know, ever since as far back as I can remember, even before I was even born, the US has been like the world police and trying to help everyone, guys. But now it's coming to a point where we can't help anyone anymore until we start helping ourselves, because the regular everyday people are struggling, okay? You know, you have how many millions of homeless in the US right now that don't even have a place to live? Or what about the working poor, which is arguably even sadder, people that have to work full-time jobs and still can't afford a place to live? You know, this happens to people, and there's not really much motivation or hope for someone when this is your situation in life, but yet we're giving billions and billions of dollars to other countries to win a war that's not even our war to fight. Other things they're doing with this money is they're going to be implementing a TikTok ban, mostly for government agency phones right now. They're also increasing their disaster aid assistance by $40 billion. They're also upping the defense budget by 10%. That's something they continually spend money on. You know, it's like, I don't know, guys, are you happy with this? Are you happy with our government spending an extra 1.7 trillion of your money right now that you're never going to see any of this money, okay? There's a couple other things in there, but to me, it's really not worth mentioning, because I don't see anything in here that's really going to benefit the everyday American when we need it the most right now. And I'm not even diving into the political aspect of this, more just like how much money that they're willing to just dole out, you know, with the stroke of a pen, and the fact that it really doesn't benefit everyday citizens, but yet we're on the hook for paying for this. You know, like, why don't we get a say-so in this? We're the ones that are going to be footing the bill. You know, your taxes that you pay every year are going to go towards paying this off. Or actually, the way that we do it is we don't actually pay anything off. We just keep increasing the debt ceiling, which is why inflation is so terrible the way it is right now. Are you guys happy with the way this is going? Because I personally am not. You know, I wish it would change. I'm not sure if it ever will. That's why I feel like the only way that any of this is ever going to go away or change is there just needs to be a complete fallout, you know? This whole system needs to just break down before there's a change, because that's when they're actually going to say, yeah, well, maybe it wasn't such a good idea to you know, print all this money and give away all this money when we're all struggling ourselves. And maybe by the time they realize that, it's going to be too late. Let me know what you guys think about all this. Merry Christmas to everybody watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit the bell notification down below. YouTube will alert you every time I post a new video. And if you don't want to wait, check out my next one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.